chairman. Today we say that in a lot of cases people elect politicians in order to change their life, in order to change the life in their country better for themselves. So they look in these politicians for a change that would improve their lifestyle. And we say that unfortunately this does not happen in a lot of cases. And we as a government believe that this is mostly due to the fact that in a lot of cases those politicians, their wages are too big compared to median wage of their country. And today what we propose is for those elected politicians that their wage would be the same as median wage well, in their country. Obviously we speak of the countries where this is actually a problem. So if in some countries they don't receive, their wages are not overly, they're not overpaid, we don't speak of those countries. So I'm going to speak of two things. I'm going to say that first of all, that the fact that they overpaid, or the fact that they now belong to some other financial layer or something like that, this closes their eyes on this problem, this blinds them, and I'm going to speak about 2 points under that this makes problem seem more distant, and that this gives them less incentive to solve the problems. And secondly, we're going to speak of that people may choose this job because of money. My colleague would speak of more specific problems that are raised by the fact that they are being overpaid. So on the first problem, we say that this question is,
do you count things like expenses claims as being part of the amount of money the politician has paid, and if not, why not?
Sorry?
Expenses. So money claimed for expenses incurred in the position of doing a job.
Yes, I think we also include expenses because we speak of we believe that the problem being raised mostly because of the way of their lifestyle. So first of all, we say that this same for them this same problem to be more distant. For example, if you are like in any case, obviously they hear of the problem, for example, of poor or medium class people, but it's one thing when you just hear about this problem, and the other when you actually face this problem in your everyday life. So it's one problem if you, for example, send your child to elite school and he studies in this elite school, but you just hear that, for example, in usual schools there are facts of bullying, or maybe they don't have enough tools, or maybe there is lack of computers in usual schools or something like that. But it's one thing. But the other thing, if your own child actually faces with this in everyday life, this is a kind of constant reminder for you that usual people in your country, let's say normal people or Indian people, they are faced with this problem, and you have a constant reminder of that. And moreover, you are reminded of that in your real life, on your life basis. No thanks. And then secondly, we say that this gives more incentive to those people to actually strive for the change, because we say this when for example your policies are also can somehow affect yourself. You have more desire to actually push these policies. So for example, again I know an example, like if you're a medium person with medium wage, you always have to, for example, buy food in Walmart. And if you're not okay with the quality of food in Walmart, you will try to do something with that. As opposed that if you always buy like in Whole Foods or something like that, which is a very expensive grocery, like you don't want, you won't be able to, you won't have so much incentive to push changes in Walmart. Yes.
What is the likelihood of your electoral success at the point at which you do not talk as a politician on the issues that people experience in their everyday lives?
Sorry, I didn't understand. Sorry. Okay, now, and my second point is about that we're going to change the fact that sometimes people may choose for example, the career path of a politician because they go for money. We know that politician is a job which is kind of say public service job, and so we want our politicians to be. To know that they are striving not for that they choose this path not because of their own selfish interest, but also because they are willing to sacrifice some of their life in order to make life for other people better. And so in a lot of cases people may choose the job of politician because they expect a lot of money coming from there, and we say that this is a problem because this could be a problem because, for example, if we support such people and if we continue this trend when people choose, for example, politician career paths because of the money they make, the moment when they will face with a choice whether to put their own interest or the interest of population, which of them is more important, they would be more inclined to choose their own interest as opposed to the interest of usual people. And so this is obviously not a thing which we expect from those politicians. And yes.
So would you be opposed in principle to paying, say, consultant doctors higher salaries than the average doctor?
I think with doctors that could be in a sense a lot of I know what you mean, but I think with doctors it's a little bit different because doctors are being the salary of doctor is being determined by, say, labor market, and with politicians could be a little bit different. So in summary, we were speaking of two problems. That first of all, this in a sense blinds politicians which we choose. It closes their eyes. It makes the problem seem more distant for them, which gives them less incentive to solve this problem. And secondly, we speak that we don't want the politicians which we elect to choose this path only solely because they want to earn more money or for their own selfish interest. Thanks.
I would like to thank the Prime Minister for that speech, and then call upon the Leader of the Opposition to open the case on behalf of the opening opposition. Here, here.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So I'm going to first be outlining what we stand for inside opposition. Second, I'm going to be explaining why we think that current rates of pay, or even slightly higher than current rates of pay, as found in most democracies, is fair compensation for a difficult job, and why we think it is beneficial to give fair compensation. Second, why we think it's often necessary to discharge the representative function that we ask of politicians in representative democracies. And then finally, why we think it's vital for attracting talent into the profession that we think would otherwise be lacking if we were to decide propositions model. So first, I mean, we think there is a problem when politicians vote on their own wages. We accept this, right? So we propose a slightly alternative mechanism whereby you could have, say, an independent panel made up of wage consultants. They exist. My uncle is one. You know, an independent body which sets the wages comparable to comparable jobs within industry. Comparable jobs in industry would be, say, very high-level clerical jobs or medium-wage consultancy, median-level consultancy jobs. You know, executive-level jobs, managerial jobs, where people discharge the same level of functions over the same variety of different tasks as politicians are required to do in a discharge of their legislative functions. So, I mean, we accept that it might be nice to have an incentive sometimes to care about the standards of living within your country, but as pointed out, is quite obvious, this incentive already exists in the democratic process. We think actually the democratic incentive is much better. Why? Because we think the democratic incentive obliges you to take a wide picture, as opposed to this particular model which ties you into a very specific metric for, you know, what you think the goodness in the country would be. We think that adding this into the system actually becomes a perverse incentive to care specifically about one economic metric, namely median wage, which is not necessarily going to be beneficial for the country's interests as a whole. So, you know, it might be the case that there are trade-offs to be made in terms of fighting inflation versus fighting unemployment, where it might be a bad thing to concentrate primarily on raising the median wage, say if you're coming from a recession, or just if you're in a country where you've adopted an economic model whereby you're trying to target high-end people entering into the country for some kind of, you know, tax break function, right? We don't condemn Andorra and Liechtenstein from the point of view of the Andorrans and Liechtensteinians. We think that probably that policy is beneficial for them, but it's not necessarily going to be beneficial for median wage. So we think that we would introduce a perverse incentive into the system. If politicians are as venal and self-motivated as opening propositions say, then it would be the case that they would be trying to, you know, raise the median wage by adopting some kind of, you know, transfer policy with regards to tax policy we don't think is actually beneficial to the country as a whole. Similarly, in terms of like raising the minimum wage, again, not obviously good. There might be harms to raising the minimum wage, even if it does raise overall the median wage, insofar as we think it causes, you know, a disincentive to work. It might have perverse incentives relative to welfare. Again, the point is tying the politicians' incentives into this particular metric, as opposed to the democratic metric that says you have to take into account the overall, you know, interest of the country as a whole, probably has perverse incentives that we don't think we're happy to support on this side. So, in terms of fair compensation, so we think that fundamentally, at the point where this is a high-level job which involves a lot of stress, and involves a lot of difficult legislative tasks, we think it's reasonable to set a salary which is comparable to other jobs in which you discharge similar functions. They claim that politicians choose politics for the money. I mean, we think, by and large, probably not. There are a large number of sacrifices in terms of your privacy and so on that you might have to make to enter into politics that would cause that disincentive relative to another job at the same pay. But second, we think even if that was true, as pointed out in my POI, there are plenty of other professions where we give financial incentives for jobs done, right? So we don't see why they're happy enough to pay consultant medics more than average doctors, given they discharge more executive functions and so on, if it's not the case that they're not happy enough to pay politicians for the work that they're doing. I mean, we stand for fair work for equal pay, just as a general principle on this side, and we don't think that's something that the side proposition are delivering us this debate. Second, though, we don't necessarily want politicians to have to worry about their day-to-day life, right? People living on a minimum wage often need to care about rents, often need to care about their mortgage, often need to care about things that people who are getting executive level salary don't have. They offer this as a positive. We think this is actually a negative because it distracts from the everyday tasks that they're supposed to be doing, right? If people are unhappy with the extent to which politicians are struggling to raise the median wage, they can vote them out of office. Whereas on their side, we think that they're probably having to worry about things so they can't necessarily concentrate on a legislative task. It's probably going to be a distraction if your garden wall is falling down, as seen as in the look. Insofar as it decreases the amount of time you have to devote to actually legislating and actually finding out different ways that other countries are trying to raise the minimum wage, if you thought that was the only metric that mattered in this debate. Finally, we say that failure to pay what's seen as being a reasonable wage breeds resentment on the part of politicians. It's one of the main drives of corruption. It's why Singapore has been so successful in fighting corruption. We don't necessarily support multi-million-dollar salaries as often in Singapore, but nonetheless we say that it has been effective in trying to remove from the political system and a strong incentive to engage in corrupt practices. Note that this is one of the main drivers for regulatory capture. Regulatory capture happens primarily because politicians resent the amount they are paid in office and think they should be paid much more, and therefore they try and line up jobs afterwards. We think this is actually representative of the obligations as an individual they often have to their families. They think their families deserve more, and often they've taken a pay cut from going into, say, relatively high-level jobs to entering into politics. I'll take closing.
Okay. We would argue that the biggest driver of corruption in lots of countries in the world is actually the fact that politicians earn far more than anyone else could earn. Those jobs you're talking about, like consulting, whatever, aren't available to local people. And we say that removing that would be the biggest driver for stopping corruption.
I mean, by definition, these are available to other people because they could stand for office, right? We support mechanisms for making politics as widely accessible to everyone as possible, but ultimately you need to get voted into office to get those salaries. But second, once you get that position, you're entitled to a salary commensurate with the amount of work you are doing. Again, our independent panel will assess that, and it's probably going to be the case that you're compared to other jobs in which you have to work very long hours and engage in trying to criticise very tedious legislation. We think this is a reasonable job to discharge important functions. But second, though, we think there's particular functions that cost a large amount of money. Like they accepted as a principle in opening opposition that they were going to collate expenses along with salary. And we think that's often very useful to kind of fight the kind of corruption that happens in the UK. For example, people trying to cheat on their expenses in order to get higher pay that they don't think they necessarily are getting in terms of the standard salary. But note that one of the major expense costs that politicians have to bear is discharging the representative function, right? So the highest expenses payment in the United Kingdom was the MP for Argyll and Bute. That's a constituent that has a large number of islands. If it wasn't possible to bear the cost of visiting all those islands and staying in guest houses, you don't have a house on every single island, you literally would not be visiting most of your constituents. How is it possible to discharge a representative function if you literally don't know most of the people you're supposed to be representing? At the very least, introducing that trade-off of having a trade-off between do I visit everyone and risk losing votes if I don't, or do I incur the cost of expenses, is probably something you don't want to be forming on politicians' minds. Also, we think it's problematic insofar as if you don't have a certain standard of lifestyle, it's very difficult to be taken seriously within elite circles. They say they're concerned that politicians don't take your ordinary people seriously. As pointed out by the point of information, obviously they have political incentives to do so. The trouble then is political elites that say run the media and so on don't take politicians seriously. This contributes to a culture of the general disrespect for the political establishment, general disrespect for politics as a profession. Why is that particularly problematic? So three, we think we have to try and attract talent into the professions. We're talking about people coming from high-level jobs in law, high-level jobs in medicine. If you don't have these people discharging legislative functions, how can you engage in serious healthcare reform? How can you engage in, for example, working to try and fight against ways in which people are evading tax if you don't have people that have experience working in accountancy? Why should these people take massive pay cuts, and why would they be likely to do so on side proposition? But if you lose those people from the legislature, it means the extent to which the legislature can actually do its main function, which is legislating, is massively impaired. For all these reasons, we're very proud to oppose.
I would like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for that speech and then call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case on behalf of the opening of the hearing.
dear Madam Speaker. I want to thank the previous speaker for his speech, and now I want to outline the main problems that we are facing today, the problems that we want to solve. So first, let me start from the rebuttal, and then I'm going to talk more about elections and problems that we face because of this differences in wages that politicians get. So first of all, what do we hear from them? We hear that democratic principle is the one that should and supposed to lead the elections and stuff like that, and politicians when it comes to motivation. Well, first of all, we're saying that although it is ideologically the best suitable principle, today practically it doesn't always work. Not all countries are willing to accept those democratic principles as their leading motivation when deciding and solving some sort of problems. And today we're saying that because the majority of population living in the country are getting the median wage, this will actually shorten or in decreasing the distance between the general population and politicians that today are treated as, even opposition says, some sort of elite, because they have this better relationships with business elites, economic elites, financial elites, and so on and so forth. This is what we want to avoid, actually. We want to make the distance between regular people, general population, and politicians as minimal as possible. Then we hear something about certain distractions. The opposition team wants people to avoid those distractions in real life and want to focus on work. Well, we're saying today that this leads to neglections of problems that regular people face in our daily lives. So today, actually, politicians do not know what problems to address because they simply do not face them, because they don't know that such problems exist in the society. So we're saying that today politicians are not some sort of special people who need to get treated specially. They need to get treated as general population, lives in what problems they're facing in order to be as efficient as they possibly can. In a minute. Then they're saying that actually they want to attract talent into profession, which today we don't understand how decreasing the wage will actually decrease the quality of people coming into profession. Today, people who are actually talented may not be driven by money, and may be driven by genuine interests or genuine problems that they have in the country, and they want to change this. So today we're not only eliminating the problem of this people who are attracted to the job because of money, but we're also solving the problem of motivating people to work in the profession despite of how much they are getting. So today, because of this system that we have, today if a politician gets a cut, of course, they're not motivated to work. This is how we get less and less problem solved and stuff like that. So politicians may focus on their job, their wage cut, instead of focusing on real problems that exist in the society. So this is this interest and dependency on how much they're getting and how much they want to get for their work. We want to be able to eliminate.
Suppose I have a large variety of expertise in finance, but I have certain facts about my private life that don't necessarily want to become public. It's happened with the Chief Secretary of Treasury in the UK. Like, what is the incentive you're offering me to take up on trade-off of loss of privacy to enter into politics if you need my talent in the legislature in order to be able to actually legislate on things like finance?
We think that today, actually, people who are able to perform some sort of jobs, not only they are able to be motivated by the simple joy of achieving a certain level of life, but also because, as my colleague said, because they are facing those problems themselves, they know how to address it more efficiently, probably, without facing other kind of costs and creating more and more benefits. Then, what do we want to talk about? So today we also talked about corruption and how this actually will lead to corruption in some sort of way. So, well, first of all, we're saying that this whole corruption will increase kind of thing really depends on the country that we're talking about and group of interests that we're talking about. And actually, I'm going to stress that corruption may be increased in the other case when we do not implement any sort of changes. So today, I'm going to talk about how actually this is harming the whole election process and how people are actually withdrawing from electing people at all because they feel this distance. They feel that politicians are some sort of special people who get treated differently and therefore cannot represent the general population. So today, because politicians are leading a different lifestyle, because they're so distant from regular people. This is why regular people may or may not be interested in voting anymore. Say an example, I'm going to talk about an example of the country that is closest to me, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan in this case. Well, when we see some sort of politicians from the UK or Denmark or some other country, and we see them riding a bicycle to their job, this makes people create this image of a person who's actually close to the regular population, who can solve some problems without caring what kind of car they're driving or what kind of bicycle they're driving to work, but only caring about going from point A to point B. And today when we see politicians riding around, say like in Moscow, in luxury cars, this may actually lead to this distrust that we are creating in the society. So overall, this may disincentivize people from participating and taking part in the elections to begin with. So today, what we want to create this, not only create this image, but also genuinely motivate people to be genuine. This is what we're saying, and all this, the whole thing about how wage should be created by the system, in this case, does not work. Why? We heard about consuls and doctors and how their wages are dependent on some sort of factors and may vary. We're saying that today, in this particular case, this should not be true, and this is not relevant. Why? Because politicians are the people who actually take part in changing people's life within the country. So to achieve more in their lives. So today, they are not only providing their services, but they should work for people and representing their interests on a high level. So all in all today, we're saying that this particular problem that exists in the society are tightly related to money, and implementing this problem will eliminate the problems that the Prime Minister mentioned. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Deputy Prime Minister for that speech, and call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue his opening opposition here.
Politics isn't an easy career path. We told you that it isn't principally fair that others in comparative professions could earn 2 or 3 times as much as them for doing a job that is of the same difficulty, of the same stress. We have no answer to this fundamental principle claim, so we'll take that to believe that proper conceding that it's unfair, and they think they outweigh it with practicalities. So I'm going to look at the practicalities, and particularly the incentives that this produces, and why. My claim is, first of all, that it doesn't actually change the incentives, because a politician's incentives are always good anyway. But if it does change the incentives, it changes it for the worst. First of all, let's look at the point about understanding the population, because this has been touched upon by both speakers so far. We've already told you that you have clear democratic incentives in order to be able to show that you understand all the people, otherwise you don't get elected. Note, of course, that a massive demographic that you have to appeal to is people from poorer backgrounds, so obviously that already exists. But second of all, we also think it's a question of skill. So if we are incentivising more people into the profession, if we're incentivising more people to say, this is what I have to offer you, we think there's also a skill in understanding people and in relating to people, and if you have more options, you're more likely to pick somebody that has that skill as opposed to just relying on somebody from the same background having it. But moreover, we don't think it's clear that they're getting a cross-section of the population on their side of the house anyway. If what they want is to be able to represent everybody, then they aren't doing it, because there's a whole host of people who presumably aren't being represented if they're in the upper middle class bracket. But moreover, you might actually get more of the sort of out-of-touch rich elites on their side of the house, because they might be the only people who can afford to do it without a bigger salary anyway, because they've got so much wealth anyway that they can rely on, and so they don't have to sort of take the expenses out of their pretty small individual salary. We'd also point out that we still get people who aren't doing it for the money on our side of the house as well. If you're willing to do it not for the money for 30 grand, you're probably also willing to not do it for the money, irrespective of whether or not you're being offered double that. The difference is, you now have to compete against people who were previously priced out of it, and you actually prove that you are actually the best candidate. Because we don't think just saying, oh, I'm not doing it for the money means you're any good at your job. It's better if you have to test that against different people. So first of all, in entirety, let's look at the incentives. So the prop claim is that you now have incentives to basically improve everybody's lives because your pay packet has an interest in having higher wages, for example. My first claim is that this is not true. We think politicians always have incentives to do well for their electoral prospects, even if they are selfishly motivated. Because if you think your motives is just the pay packet that you're taking home, then presumably keeping yourself in a job is going to be an incredibly strong motivational factor for you. So we think the real comparative is you have politicians on each side of the House who are equally motivated and equally personally incentivised to do well, but our politicians are better able to achieve this. Why is that? Because you are more likely to get highly capable people entering the profession on our side of the House. The voters quite simply have more options. That means you have more people to choose from in respect of who closely represents your position. It also means you still have the people that are standing on government side of the House, because if you're willing to do it for 30 grand, as I say, you're willing to do it for more money. You're still going to put yourself forward. The only difference is these specific groups of people are less likely to be driven towards corruption because they feel like they aren't being paid a fair salary. The feeling of injustice incentivises a culture of corruption that facilitates that happening. But the difference is, you now also have those people who did have better options elsewhere. People who previously turned down a career in politics because they're not getting enough money and they have bigger offers elsewhere. So we think, therefore, when you have more people to choose from, you're more likely to get people who are better able to represent the wishes of constituencies, people who are better advocates, better debaters, better at scrutinising legislation, better at enacting economic policies. But let's say for a second that this policy does affect the incentives that politicians have. If this is true, then that is even worse. Why is that? Because the way that it actually motivates people is to make them care specifically about the median wage. This is almost certainly going to be middle class people, or at the very least people at the lower end of the middle class. These are people who, let's be honest, are probably doing all right. Note, you do not have a personal incentive to improve the lives of the very poorest people. If the poorest person becomes less poor, that does increase the mean average wage, but it doesn't affect whatsoever the median wage. The consequence of this is you have no incentive to improve the salaries of people right at the bottom end of the bracket. And indeed, you probably have an active incentive to keep unemployed people out of work, because then they mess up your statistics and move the median even further down, and you lose money out of it. So if you believe they're incentivised by this, it probably gets worse. We would say it's probably objectively bad if you're massively distorting away from the poor people in your society that are most in need of government help, and indeed away from the wealthiest people whose business activities have the biggest effect on the state. But we think even if for some reason that is good, then we think presumably this should happen through a legitimate democratic process.
You say that this injustice creates corruption. However, when you screen for people who want to go into the profession for money alone, what you actually do is you remove the people who are most likely to be corruptible.
Yes. That doesn't affect our analysis, first of all, that says that if you feel like you're not getting enough money in order to be able to do your job, you're more likely to be able to convince the people around you that it's fine to to smudge the expenses a bit and make it seem like you're getting more money than you are, because everybody can appreciate the injustice. If you're already getting paid a comparable wage to people in other professions, you're more likely to be like, well, that's not cool when you see other people doing that. I can't remember the other half of that point. So essentially what we're saying is, even if it is, even if you decide that it's fine for some reason for this distorting effect to take place, we think this represents a very specific economic or tax philosophy that essentially ought to be voted upon. We think it's something that can only be legitimate through the democratic process, not by creating selfish incentives. And indeed, this is conceded by opening government as ideologically the best principle. They just assert that it doesn't work, but they don't actually give us any analysis as to why it doesn't work. We think it probably does, so if it is the best principle, we should go with that. We think, but that's particularly true given the economic policy, which is what this is the most highly electorally determinative issue across different countries. So we think you have a very clear comparative coming out of this debate. You have the same politicians that you get on government side of the House, you also have them on our side of the House. The difference is you also have an additional amount of politicians, so you can better choose the best people, which obviously has massive effects for the decisions that they're taking. But second of all, we think if this policy is capable of affecting the specific incentives that people have, it changes them for the worse. There's no reason to believe that corruption would be higher. There are other high-paid professions that aren't corrupt. Oppose the motion.
on to the second half of the debate. The floor is the member of government to extend on behalf of the closing government. Take care.
We ready? Yes. Okay, opening conversation, I want to talk a lot about the United Kingdom. I mean, the thing is this debate doesn't really take place in the United Kingdom. It was set in countries where there's a real issue of overpay. In the United Kingdom, politicians are paid 25 grand more than the average person, and that's quite a lot, right? But this debate happens, and this is the most biggest effect in places like South Africa, like Kenya, like Indonesia, like India, where people are paid 50, sometimes even 100 times the average amount, right? That's where the actual big effect of this, what the distortion effects, what the corruption effects we're going to talk about, bring in. So what am I going to tell you? I'm going to tell you about how people get into power in those nations, how they change because of the wages, how that leads to a distortion of the democratic process, and the creation, in some cases, essentially of one-party states, in a way in which people break down the protections we place. And secondly, the effect it has on your ability to empathise and deliver solutions. First, 2 notes and 4 pieces of rebuttal. So note number 1, I've almost covered it, is that this is defined in countries where there's an issue of overpay, and that is just mainly places like India and South Africa, which is where most of my analysis will go. I think my analysis will apply to the United Kingdom, but I think it's more of a marginal case in this debate. It's not really where this debate takes place. Secondly, we're pointing at this also as a note, happens in a world where democracy is not perfect. And they can't just stand up and say they'll set up transparent solutions in all these different ways. So we point out that politicians still have and do have the de jure and de facto power to change them in many cases. So opening opposition. First, and they tell us actually in both cases, raising the median wage is not necessarily a good idea. We point out that we are in general talking in this debate about relatively poor nations where a base rise in living standards is the most important. That does apply to the median wage. In most income distributions, the median wage, the person in the middle, is actually very low down, and the tail goes sort of that, as it were, so it's still very low down. So we're not talking about lower middle class people. Yeah. And we're talking about also that the perverse incentive is less, and the other stuff I'll talk about, right? And then on this idea that it's a distraction, you can't work in it, politicians don't like this. We're pointing out the vast majority of people do work very hard on these wages and continue to live, right? Now it's the case for most people, and actually that politicians will be able to do it too, and that's sort of fine. And we see all these other people surviving and living fine lives, and we think it's sort of wrong to say that politicians are somehow immune to hard work on average wages when other people obviously actually do have to do it, right? It's not the case that people who work in these wages otherwise are lazy or anything. Thirdly, they talk about attracting people, but that's not true, right? So places like the United Kingdom, where politicians are paid much, much less than people who are going to management consultancy or accountancy or any of the other high-paid jobs in the United Kingdom, we still find there's a high demand to be politicians because we say that people place a value on being valued by others and chosen to represent them, and that's actually an incredibly prestigious thing that means a lot to people that will still be a large motivator. And we say that B, also people do have an initial sense of public service. We refuse to believe that people are everyone is justified by money. However, we would say those who are attracted on this, number 4, are more likely to be corrupt. So they say that injustice creates corruption. We say that people who choose to go into politics because it's just by far a better paying career than any other job which is in any way available to them, are the most likely to prioritise money over principles and other things, most likely to act in a corrupt way. We say the actual seed of a corruption is that individual and the extent to which we think their conscience holds out. We say their conscience is less likely to hold out if they're choosing to opt into a career based on a monetary basis instead of on other bases, which is what the POI was getting at and was not, I think, adequately responded to. So, talking about this situation first, and in terms of people becoming greedy and the effects of that. So people get into power, right? So there's a huge amount of wealth that isn't really elsewhere. And in South Africa, Kenya, Indonesia, the jobs that Duncan talks about, he wants to compare it to, like management consultants, are just not realistic options. There's the vast majority of people, right, in terms of who are going for these jobs, right? And what that means is that being in power is not just a way to advance political interests, but personal ones it is in not other situations. We say that A, that people are greedy, they become used to this life, and they want to do everything to continue it. I know lots of things that a party and an individual can do to subvert the political process. They can choose to break campaign campaigning laws in the way in which they campaign and sort of the campaigning tactics they use. They use to take on the judiciary, they can choose to gerrymandering and to set up democratic processes as reforms to make it harder to remove them. We see these things, so more likely in the countries we're talking about. Something like the INC has been very good at this and taking on the court and gerrymandering. Yes, Duncan?
I mean, presumably people want to perceive they have incentives gerrymandering your side too. Why would, though, the independent panel set the same wages the ANC would set themselves? Don't you lose a whole bunch of really talented people that could get jobs as consultants from running the South African economy at the point where load shedding is probably breaking it?
We think that the independent panel actually would just be very likely to set wages much higher than most people in the ANC who are coming through the trade union movement would be able to access otherwise, which is why everybody's incentives to continue to keep that job the way they don't do otherwise. If losing this job doesn't mean a massive personal sacrifice for them, right? Because what it means, if you're in this situation, it means if you're outvoted, right? It means having to take your child out of that special school and put them in the local school. It means having to move house. It means having to have a massive impact on your quality of life quite often, which is different in other situations where you're so keen to hang on. And the thing is that these actions, which they can do, disenfranchise people. It removes the accountability functions of democracy. They say they'll vote people out. It's often not that clear, right? And B would say it can go further. We said that situations like the violence in Kenya, it's a direct result of people just literally wanting to hang on to the trappings of power, which we remove on our side when we don't pay them so much. So secondly now, looking at how people are more in tune with policy on our side. So as we said, people often go in with good intentions. Note the ANC is dominated by the labour movement and people who worked their way up through the labour movement, right? But firstly, the personal effect of law changes change for you when you're richer, right? Higher taxes are things you no longer want. You no longer care about state resources like education and healthcare, so they no longer affect you, right? But secondly, people tend to be politicians or want to be politicians for long years of time. It's normal to see 20, 30, 40-year careers for politicians. And in this, they lose an understanding, A, because the effects and problems of a median wage voter are different in 1970 than when they were today. And if you last lived on a median wage in 1970, you do not have the ability to bring the solutions to that and to empathise with what people on low pay actually live like at the moment, right? Because it's just wholly different. So you lose that ability to empathise and then create solutions around it, right? You have an academic interest instead of a personal interest in bringing that improvement. But secondly, who you spend time with creates an empathy gap, right? Who lives in your neighbourhood? Who are the parents of your child, of your a daughter or son's friends? Who's on the public transport you're with? Who's attends the sort of parties and things you're at? They affect you, and they're defined by income, panel, right? And then you prioritise those around you. It's very difficult to overcome that mental block when you spend your entire time around those people and their interests, and they're subtly forwarding it by talking about the changes they would like to see. And that's how you get captured by elites, right? By the fact that they all live in a town together which is separate from everyone else and different to everyone else. And that capture is not possible when these politicians aren't able to pay for this massive change in lifestyle to ingratiate themselves with these elites. I'm very proud to propose.
I would like to thank the Member of Government for that speech and then call on the Member of Opposition to extend the case on behalf of the Opposition bench here.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, about the countries, about second government, want to talk about Karina, I will tell you more. But the main idea of giving median wage is false at the base assumption of that, because they believe that when the politicians will get this median wage, it's not going to be only money they have, that it's going to be only things that they can receive from their work. They just believe that there's not going to be lobbying and corruption. They try to persuade us that it's not going to work like that. But we as the second government will tell you that all of the people, not only the politicians who are more who are poor or who are more from the elites will be more under this lobbying issue. So the most important in this the most important idea in this debate is the crisis of trust that we cause these motions, because they told us. First opposition told us about a lot of small issues which actually conclude in the biggest idea of the crisis of trust. So first of all, now we have a situation in status quo when politicians, we don't trust politicians a lot as their citizens, but we sometimes believe that that sometimes they know what they do, maybe they steal something, maybe they are corrupted, maybe they are underdeveloping, but sometimes we believe that they know what they are doing because they are educated, because they receive this job from something. And we believe that, okay, they are politicians, but they work in our for our benefits because they have to win the elections and so on and so on. And now we have the situation in which to politics goes people who want to be not the poor people that want to change their situation, not even this workers' party who want to change the situation of workers, but they go only politicians who already have money to be in this politics. Because if you have to put a lot of money to your political campaign, if you have to put a lot of effort, put a lot of work to win this campaign, you have to have money for that before you win the election. So the only way you can have this money is have this money from a huge business or have this money from your own benefits. Yes?
On the point of corruption, who do you think is more trustworthy? A person who went to politics because of high-paid job, or a person who went to politics despite the medium wage?
Despite the minimum, because you assumed on the government bench that this is only these good people who want to change the world and they don't care that they have median wage because they want to work pro publico bono. It's not actually true, because a lot of people will go to the politics just because they believe that there is a lot of money that will have like from these outside sources. Like they don't believe they will have a lot of a huge salary, but they believe they will have this money from huge business, they will have this money from great corporations. And it doesn't really change the situation, because people are easily to corrupt. And even if they believe that they will have this minimum wage, they believe that there is a lot of outside sources of money. So we want to tell you that now we have in status quo we have small or bigger possibility that people who want to do something for society, people who want to work for this society, create new parties, create new NGOs and so on and so on, they have possibility to do this, and they have possibility to go to the government. Maybe it's harder, but it is possible. When this motion, when we introduce this motion, those people will have no means at all, because they will know that even if they now want to spend a lot of effort, they will not have any good coming from them after they get to the parliament. And what is even more important, people who earn only this median wage when they are politicians, it's not that they will understand needs of people better because they have median wage and they understand these Walmart problems and so on and so on. It's not actually true, because their situation will be, they will have this outside money, even if it's not from the business directly, it's from the business who's paying for the party they're in. So they will have these outside sources, and they will believe that if I can manage with this money, with this median wage, all the people who voted for me should manage as well, because if I can do this, they should be able to do this as well. So they will not care for these people who are in the same situation as them, because they are well enough, and they can do without any raises or so on. Thank you. And what is the second type of people who will be in this situation is these elites who will have money from home, from their families and so on and so on, or people who already gain some position in society, who already gain some money, and they don't care for these people anymore, because okay, I have money and I don't I earn this all by myself, or I have this money from other sources, but I care only about my group of people, about my elites, my educated people, and so on and so on. And what will it cost at all? It's going to be like huge crisis of trust in the society. Because in a situation in which we believe, in the status quo, we believe that people steal, that the politicians steal, that politicians may be corrupted, but we have this small belief that that maybe some people are going there because they earn the same amount of money like they earn in business, but they want to change something for better. But now we will think only about the people who will be corrupted. We know that they are from these elites, or we know that they are corrupted because they have no other means to gain a lot of money. So this will cause this crisis of trust, which will be really, really bad for the situation in their country, because people will not participate in the society life, the people will not participate in the elections, and they will not think about their country anymore. And so with taking care only about their groups of people, only about their needs, they will just spread this inequality, and they will care only about their own situation, lobbying and corruption. Thank you.
I would like to thank the member of opposition for that speech, and call upon the government to close the debate and now the chair.
I apologise, that's quite a lot of people to hear. In this speech, we're going to talk about two things. First of all, we're going to look at incentives for policy and who actually gets real policy change that actually affects real life people. Look at within that the sort of crisis of trust stuff we talked about in closing opposition. Second of all, we're going to look at who goes into office, and we'll still get quality politicians, but those politicians are not there because what they want is huge amounts of money, but are there and are moral individuals, and we have that sort of screening process, right? First of all, two brief bits of rebuttal that don't neatly fit into all my other stuff in relation to closing opposition. So first of all, we were told about this thing about, talking about funding for political campaigns, right? So note that this is just a separate issue that we would like to deal with, but unfortunately can't, right? That is, look, most of funding for most political campaigns come from outside sources that are on individuals' own bank accounts, right? The fact that they are paid less is not a problem with outside funding. But second of all, actually, we think the reform that is needed to have, reduce the amount of influence that, big business can have over campaigns happened when people don't want to be so tied up in having huge amounts of money, when campaigns are no longer tied up in that sort of thing, but also when individuals are no longer so scared of giving up power because it would ruin their lives, would mean their children have to move schools, they have to move houses, their quality of life is hugely impeded, and they're not so worried about that. In fact, they're probably more willing to take reforms to make, politics far more equal than on the second side. Second of all, then, in terms of sort of like money from outside sources, so looking at taking funds from businesses and the sort of corruption thing, right? So on either side, this is immoral, and we hope most people don't do it, right? The thing is you do that, one, when you are predisposed to want to actively seek out money. We think, as I'm going to talk about later, as Ed talks about, which we never responds to, we screen out those sort of people at the point at which we say, look, this is a job that won't pay you ridiculously large amounts of money, but you should still want to go into. But second of all, you risk it less when the things that are on the line are just, it's not such a big risk on the line, right? So let's go look at the two things then. So first of all, about incentives for policy making, right? So we think that most people probably, do go into politics wanting to genuinely help out, right? In the same way that opening opposition themselves told us. The thing is, the problem is once they encounter money, their life changes, right? So lots of people who go into politics do not necessarily come from hugely rich backgrounds. The problem is their lifestyle changes as soon as they have access to that money, right? They do just then start to steal things, right? But that does then change how they interact with policies, right? It means welfare policies affect them differently. Taxation policies affect them differently to how the median person operates, right? The thing is, opposition then told us, well, they'll have perverse incentives to look after, median things, right? If perverse incentives do exist, then they are better when they are aimed at the median person, the rich person who they would otherwise be, right? No thank you, right? When those sorts of things happen. Especially because, as Ed tells you, the sort of countries we're talking about, right? Improving the median income is of a huge benefit to the sort of people we are talking about, and does affect real people and their livelihoods, right? And there's something we should care about, right? But also just in terms of long term, right? As we told you all up and down government bench, Like, they do just lose an understanding at the point at which they don't operate within, like, that sort of system. As we go further, though, in closing, we tell you two things. First of all, the problems just do change over time, right? So the problems that the working class faced 30 years ago are just different from those that we face now, and therefore they don't understand how those things work, right?
Maxine.
No, thank you, right? And second of all, also, it has an impact in terms of who you socialise with, right? So in pretty much all nations, socialising structures happen within a basis of, one, you socialise with people just like who live next door to you. Those happen to live in communities which also have lots of money, right? But also you send your kids to schools of people who also have lots of money, right? But also, like, it just is a status symbol that, like, if you have money, you should only be socialising with people who also have money, right? This sort of thing means is you just don't all, like, constantly come into contact with these sorts of people in your everyday lives in a way that you, like, genuinely, meaningfully care about these people. Yes, it's fine for them to say, look, they still have a political incentive to, you know, care about these people. But the thing is, no, thank you, they don't, right? They can whitewash it in rhetoric and things that they do all of the time, while making, you know, sort of like huge budget cuts to things like welfare, right? And still will get elected, right? Those things are not enough to just say they have to appeal to them, because actually what they don't is they have other interests at heart, right? We think, what's then this mean about policy, right? It just means that they lose out on knowing what the best solutions are, right? They don't tackle the actual problems necessarily facing people because they don't know what those are, right? But also, second of all, right, in relation, it just becomes a problem of crisis of trust, right? The way that you engage people in politics is, one, you have to actually get to sort of like working class people to turn out and tell their politicians what they want to happen. That only happens when they believe them to be normal individuals who are going to listen to what they say, right? The thing is closing opposition wants to talk about crisis of trust, right? We argue that happens far worse when there are headlines about the wealth of politicians, right? There are headlines about them doing exorbitant things, pictures of them constantly living in like fancy places, driving fast cars, right? No, thank you. Like, that sort of image of politicians makes it seem that there is a gap in who represents you and who happens, right? That is what shuts people off from wanting to engage in politics. That stops any of that sort of like political accountability stuff from holding weight, because those people don't go out and engage in it in the first place, right? You don't ever get those sorts of things taken.
I mean, as bold a move as it was to try and reset this debate in a corrupt one-party state, in South Africa, they're currently experiencing rolling blackouts because the ANC doesn't have any engineers. Why would they take a 22 times pay cut down to 9,000 rand? And why would it be a good thing to try and give the perverse incentives, as Chris points out, which are massively retrogressive in terms of the effect on the poor in South Africa?
Okay, so lots of people don't go into politics because they want lots of money, and those are the sort of people we want to keep there, right? So yes, less people will now want to go into politics, right? But the people that we screen out are those who are only there because they can get a huge pay bonus, right? Who will get 50 times what the median average earner is earning, right? Second of all, if you want to talk about sort of things like the blackouts in Africa, right, those sort of things are happening because they can hide away in their own separate lives and not care about the average person, because they don't necessarily have to deal with those in exactly the same way, right? They can be buffered from those sort of lives, right? Those don't happen, right? Second of all, though, and we'll deal with this that point more, right? Who do we just get into this sort of thing, right? So first of all, it is probably, and we're reopening, that the people that go into power are probably reasonably moral people, right? First of all, in terms of structural thing, we think we weed out the sort of people who are only there for money when we say, look, you have to do these median things, right? First of all, that just is lots of people, right? So see, every democratic country has a leftist movement. This is based in sort of workers' unions and things like that, who want to take people from those backgrounds and put them into office, right? Those people are still going to exist, and for them, this is still going to be a reasonable amount of money, right? But also, lots of people go into politics for other reasons, i.e. they genuinely want to help the populace, or those sort of people. Those are the people we want to be front and centre, and we only get that sort of mechanism when it happens, right? But also, two, these good people under status quo, even if they are all good people, right? Go in and then get corrupted by money when they haven't, right? They go in and then they get paid huge amounts of money. One just makes people become more greedy, right? They get accustomed to a certain sense of lifestyle they want to keep because it's easy and it's conducive to the lifestyle, right? That means they're likely to keep getting it, right? So it gets to the sort of problems that we never get to respond to in Ed's speech, right? There is lots of parties have an incentive to form a one-party state. Politicians have every incentive to try and keep in power because a change in lifestyle to them is so great that they never want to lose that power, right? So because on our side, you still get quality politicians, but they are those who actively want to be there and not just there, so they can embezzle lots of money from the state. We urge you to propose this motion.
I would like to thank the government speaker and give the floor to the opposition to close the opposition of the debate as a whole. Here.
First of all, we still think this debate happens in the entirety of the world where inequality between median and politicians' wages exists, because the inherent contradiction in closing government, which tried to tell us that there is an open access to those politicians' jobs. The last speaker just said that there's still people who are going into it and then going to get corrupted, and also that these are closed cliques of people who are politicians. We think they can't argue on both sides of the house saying this is actually what happens. We can, you can make different choices, but if you are describing a world in which there is open access to political jobs, then you can't say that this is a job, that this is a world of a country where there is no open access. That is an inherent contradiction. What I want to tell you, what happens in this debate. We believe politicians are open to manipulations, which doesn't mean that all of them are inherently corrupt. But the problem is, what they want on the other side of the house is they want to change the individuals who come into politics so that there wouldn't be the type of people who go in there just for the money. What we tell you is that they never respond to the problem of the external sources of money. That's why the mechanism of reducing the wages of the politicians cannot work as the changing of the nature of people who enter politics, because the nature of people who enter politics can still be manipulated by money that comes from external resources, either the party resources or lobbying, as my partner was telling you. We see corporations impacting the world all throughout it. Special economic zones in the European Union, which are prevalent, where companies do not pay taxes because of legislation. We see legislation in the US favoring massive companies, and we also see, digging of natural resources all around the world. And we think that this matters because the reason why legislation allows those corporations to be there is that politicians are willing to accept money for what happens there. That's why we think you cannot exclude that part of the debate, even though we didn't hear a lot of responses for closing government on what we have said. What I want to talk about in the summary is, first of all, I'll take you in like a minute. What I want to talk first of all is that where trust for politicians comes from all around the world, but in particularly in democracies where we have some sort of accountability. Second of all, what is the best type of political political outcome that you can get when types of people enter politics. And thirdly, why in countries with biggest inequalities, the type of countries they want to talk about, it is a particularly bad idea to put those people on median wages. So first of all, we believe that, or actually before that, yeah, go.
All democratic institutions are to some extent fragile. When being unelected has a drastic effect on your quality of life, you're more likely to do everything to block that happening, including immoral actions.
Well, the problem is that, at the point at which you are already a politician, let's say, right now, and you have access to sources of money, you're going to stack that money, increase your privilege, increase the inequality in the country, so that in case you don't get elected, that's what happens now. That's what already happens now. But you never responded. There are corporations which lobby. There are corporations which lobby with money. I don't understand why, therefore, you can assume that there is simply no external source of money, which is what you are trying to say in this debate all along. That there's only the money that you're being paid as a wage as a politician, which we've told you cannot be true. Now, we believe that what happens is that, you elect politicians because there's the delivery of the promises. As I pointed out in my POI at the very beginning to opening government, if you cannot talk about the issues that concern people, you cannot get their vote, simply. Because if you don't want to talk about this, they're not going to trust that you have any clue what they're doing. Now, we think that the problem the reason that it matters is because if you see, for example, Lib Dems in the UK, they didn't get elected again because they failed to deliver on the promises. They did exactly the things they didn't promise. It's a very common thing. Tories, they screw over people, but they still deliver on their promises of, cuts in welfare. They do promise that, they deliver, people still elect them. We don't think that there's that much to say that, if your life is that much increased, you really vote for people. You want promises to be delivered because that's where the trust comes from. We told you that when lobbying happens, that's when promises cannot be delivered. Anya was telling you and explaining to you why it's not possible for you to really be just accountable to your voters at the point at which you don't have enough money to travel to your constituency. Therefore, you need to be the person who actually takes money from these companies to do your job even better. You actually have the incentives, even if you are a good person, to take some external money and make some trade-offs because you need to be able to function as a politician. Therefore, having the expenses of travel, having the expenses of negotiations, and being able to pay for political ads and things like that. Secondly, we believe that the best type of political outcomes that you can get is if the type of people who participate are actually more, if politics is more accessible. They try to tell us that people making the sacrifice are the better type of people. We believe that the people that can afford to make the sacrifice that is actually never responded to on the opposition bench are the people who don't have to feed 5 children. Therefore, not the ordinary people who, are simply there having to struggle for every penny. If they are on the median wage and then having many more responsibilities, spending much more time at work when they are politicians, we think that is problematic. That means that only the elites, which already have the money, are going to be able to be part of the political process, which was already told you by by both of the teams. We also added to that we believe that with party financing, when you still have parties which still accept donations from external sources, you have this additional motivation where the party determines much more what you do as a politician, because they are your source of security for the future in some way. You're loyal to them, therefore it's much more possible for you to do well, and also, maybe get a job afterwards that they can promise you because of the influence that they can have over you. As Anya was telling you when she was telling you that, parties still get a lot of financing from the outside, and therefore they are not affected by this entire structure of reducing the wages of only the MPs. The parties are not just the MPs, and politicians belong to parties. And thirdly and lastly, what we want to say is that in the countries where there are biggest inequalities, this is a particular problem, because that's exactly where you have people who are already wealthy, particularly entering politics. And in order to be elected, you need to have some money, you need to have some skills. Because in order to be elected, you need to go through a particular type of education where you can actually talk publicly. I mean, that's unfortunately the reality. The problem is, they are talking about countries where there are massive rampant inequalities, and in those set of circumstances, even more access to the profession of politics is closed for other people. We think putting them on median wage simply makes them look better, but what it actually allows them to do is at the cover of the median wage to accept all the money from foreign companies without actually any accountability. So in essence, what we get out of that is the very same group of people working in those countries, because nobody else has the skills and the money to be able to afford to work in politics, but also now they have the cover-up of being able to accept money more easily from MNCs. And for all those reasons, because you don't actually change the world for a place where money will still be an incentive for people, but it will just come from a worse source. For this reason, we beg you to oppose.